Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is none of us are the Huxtables. Now, if you're not familiar who the Huxtables are, they were a fictional family that appeared on network TV in the, I think it was 1984, 1992. Family was led by Cliff Huxtable, who was an obstetrician, his wife, Claire Huxtable, who was an attorney at law, and their kids. Sandra, who was a college student when the show came on. She was a college student at Princeton. Their daughter, Denise, who was a kid who was kind of like in the middle. She was trying to find her way and figure herself out. She went to Hillman College, only to be there for a year before she flunked out. Their son, Theodore, aka Theo Huxtable, he was the only boy. And then there was a daughter, Vanessa, who was the pest and the child that was kind of getting into everything. And then there was little cute Rudy Huxtable, who was the baby girl. She was the baby of the family, and she was, spoiled, but a good kid nonetheless. One of the great things about the Huxtables was that they portrayed a life that we had not, up until that time frame, had not seen on black TV. On TV for black families. And so they portrayed a different lifestyle, and in a lot of ways it was, and I'm not saying that black people didn't live like that, but it gave a chance for the world to see how we lived and that we were diverse as far as like our families and our backgrounds and our differences and our similarities and everything in between. But the thing about the Huxtables, and again, they were a fictional family, there was very little dysfunction with the Huxtables. As someone who's watched every episode all the time, and I still watch it. I still watch the Cosby Show at least, a couple of times a week. I'll catch an episode here or there. They weren't dysfunctional at all. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that particularly if we look at our families, more specifically black people, a lot of us have some level of dysfunctionality in our families. And, some of it's very out front in the open, and others, it's very subtle. But nonetheless, each member of the Huxtables are different, obviously, right? And they portrayed a lifestyle that I think was, while it was aspirational and inspirational, it wasn't necessarily what we definitely see on a day-to-day basis. Because when you think about it, ask yourself this. Did we come from a broken home? Did you come from a broken home? And what I mean by broken, were your parents divorced? Were your parents never married? Were your parents absent? I've got friends, probably several podcasters who I know that I'm really, really cool with and friends with. They've had similar backgrounds. I've talked on here before about how, my parents got divorced when I was 13, almost 14 years old. And so that's, a level of dysfunctional. And it's not, it kind of is what it is, but it is dysfunctional because it's not the Huxtables. But and I'll give you an example. Like, one of my friends who I played ball with, he had told me when we were in college, as we were playing football, that his biological father, had never seen him play football ever, not one down. And he kind of lamented at the fact that he would have liked, because we were at South Carolina State at the time playing football, he would have liked for his father to had at least seen him play football. And his dad never saw. And it wasn't because his dad was no longer here. His biological father just wasn't in his life. And that bothered him. Again, dysfunctional, not the Huxtables. And then one of my other buddies, real close friend, my boy Russ, Russ, for example, like his parents, and I loved his parents. God bless their souls. Russ's parents, particularly like our freshman year, we came in together in 1991. Russ's parents would drive down from DC, right? They would drive down from DC, and we were freshmen, and we were being redshirted, so that meant that we weren't playing at all. But his parents would come to the games anyway. And I mean, like, that is hella supportive when you think about it. If you're going to travel from our nation's capital in DC to come all the way to Orangeburg, South Carolina, which is probably at that time, probably about a 7.5 hour drive to see your son warm up. And that's it. Like, he's not going to play at all. And you know, he's not going to play because he's being redshirted. But that support, you know, that's not being dysfunctional. So I had an interesting childhood, and I've talked about this on the podcast before. My crew of my closest friends that I grew up with, like all of them, I may have been the exception, but all of my close friends and my crew had a mom and dad at home. I mean, like, I was the only one by the time we got to middle school that didn't have a mom and dad at home. I lived with my mom, but my dad was, you know, just across town in my hometown of Florence, South Carolina, and I would see him on the weekends. And my dad is still my guy. I mean, like, we would still talk every other day, or, you know, we see each other and we hang out and stuff like that. So it wasn't like he wasn't in my life or anything. He wasn't down the hallway anymore. But, you know, I actually thought that was normal. I thought it was normal, the fact that all of my friends had their mom and their dad in the house. I was like, you know, I was just different, but I didn't realize that most black kids, or at least the black kids that I would get to know later on in life, in high school and subsequently in college, a lot of them didn't have mom and dad at home. A lot of them did come from blended families. Some of them did have a level of dysfunction in their families. And most of us were not the Huxtables. And that's cool, because nobody's the Huxtables, right? But what I'm reminded of is, and the reason why I wanted to bring this to the podcast, was that I was having a conversation with my middle son, Cameron, who at the time of this recording is 22 years old, right? Cameron and I were talking, and he was telling me about a conversation that he was having with some of his friends. And the friends were sitting around and they were talking, and they were talking about toxic traits. And somehow it got, the conversation came to the toxic traits in their families. And, you know, the question was, what toxic traits did you get from your parents? And he subsequently asked me the question because the question was posed to him. And I drew a blank. I drew a blank because I didn't really, you know, sometimes we can have toxic things in our life and toxic things get passed to us and we don't necessarily recognize them as being toxic. And, you know, when he asked me that, my first answer was, oh, nothing, you know, because I'm thinking to myself, like, my parents weren't drug addicts, you know, they weren't abusive, they weren't, you know, selling drugs, they weren't, you know, out here committing crimes, anything like that. So they didn't pass on anything toxic to me. And then he pointed out the fact that, he said, you know, what do you think your parents passed on to you that was toxic? And I said, well, nothing. And he said, well, you always told us about how, you know, you guys couldn't, me and my brother, his uncle, we could not voice our opinions at home. And I said, well, you know, I said, I didn't really view that as something toxic, but yeah, no, in our house, you couldn't, you had no, as a child, you had no opinion. Opinion? No. You ain't paying the bills. You ain't putting food on the table. You have no opinions. You do as you're told. At 52 years old, at the time of this recording, I came up in an era where we heard this all the time. A child's place is to be seen, not to be heard. And they meant that. But I think the way that he described it, I was like, yeah, I guess that could be a toxic trait. I did say, once we started talking, I thought about it. I was like, you know, one of the toxic things I think that happened, which was more of a byproduct of the divorce, was the ability or the lack thereof to love and the apprehension on loving. As far as, like, I mean, of course I love my mom, my dad, my brother. I'm the oldest. and my brother is 3 years younger than me. Of course, I love them. They're my world, especially up until that point. But relationally wise, when it came to relationships, love really wasn't, clicking for old young 12K. I will say that it probably, my apprehension to love or to be loved or to give love probably ruined some relationships or potential relationships, because there could have been relationships that could have festered from that, but didn't, because, my thing was this: because the divorce came out of nowhere, like I never heard my parents argue or anything like that. They just came up to us one day and said, hey, we're getting a divorce. For me, it's like, I'm never going to let anybody outside of these 3 people get that close to me to where I can be hurt. So I was very, protective of my feelings, and I think rightfully so, but I probably was a little bit way more protective than I should have been. And that transferred into, high school, subsequently college, and then after college, and so forth and so on. But I didn't necessarily view that as a toxic trait, but it was very toxic. And so I flipped the conversation on him. I said, well, what toxic thing do you think that we passed on to you? And he said, he didn't say like it was toxic. He's like, but like there's a fear of failure. And I was like, okay, that's a start. And he's like, well, guys always want us to be successful. And I said, well, here's the thing. I said, let me stop you here. I was like, success is determined and defined by you. No one else can determine and say what your level of success is. I was like, we always told you the motto in our house has always been success is expected. And it is, but it's based on what you do. It's not, that doesn't mean that you have to be a CEO of a company or you have to be the president of the United States. No, it doesn't have to be that. You can be a garbage guy and still be successful. Like, it's not determined by how much money you make or what your role is or who you marry or anything like that. But he said like the fear of failing, the fear to step out on your own and try different things. And I said, well, are you feeling nostalgic for the golden eras of rap and soul music? If so, tune in to the Rap Soul Podcast. We are your weekly journey through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, spotlighting the music and the hidden gems that shape the soundtrack of our lives. From the powerful beats to the soulful melodies, we bring you the best of the past with fresh insights and stories. Rediscover the music that defined a generation. Subscribe to the Rap Soul Podcast and enjoy the vibes. If you want a podcast where culture, conversation, and life collide, where you get insightful commentary, engaging discussions, and a fresh perspective on everything, then you need to listen to the 12 Kyle podcast, hosted by the one and only, yours truly, 12 Kyle, a voice that you know and trust. This podcast will bring you thought-provoking moments, compelling stories, and a whole lot of fun. Whether you're a first-time listener or just tuning in, each episode promises to be something new and exciting. So sit back, relax, join 12 Kyle, myself, and my guests as we break down the world around us and give you stories that you've never heard before, from nostalgic throwbacks to everything in between. The 12 Kyle podcast is a front row seat to this conversation. Subscribe now and never miss an episode of the 12 Kyle podcast, where the vibe is always real and the discussion is always worth your time. I think that was something that was encouraged, but he was just like, well, no, you guys, you pushed us and pushed us and pushed us. And, it's been like, a thing where you're scared to try sometimes or scared to fail. And I said, look, you're going to fail at everything that you don't try. Period, point blank. I mean, like, I can't make it any more simpler than that. And I think it's important that as a father, I tell you that you're going to fail at anything that you don't try, but you can try and fail and get up and try it again or try something different, but you lose every time you don't try. And the thing that I would never accept from anybody in my household is not trying. I don't care if you see something and you want to go after it, try it. What's the worst that can happen? If you don't get it, then you pick yourself up and you figure it out and you try to do something else. But I also reiterated to him, like, look, let that fear push you, because I too have had the same fear of failing. And that fear of failing it gets even bigger once you become a parent, because now, at one point in time, if I failed, it was just me. You know what I mean? Like, that's cool. If I fail and it don't work, I can go live in a cardboard box. But when you got a family, you have a wife, you have kids, you just don't want to fail, because you don't want them looking at you like you're a failure, or you can't help me because these kids didn't ask to come here. They're a gift from God. They didn't ask to come here. It is my job to provide. Does that mean you need to be living in a mansion? No. You just have to have a roof over your head. But I thought that was a very interesting conversation. His younger brother, Brandon, our youngest son, I asked him, I said, well, what do you think, what do you think about this conversation? And he was listening. He's like, well, he's like, me being the youngest boy, I have 2 older brothers. I feel like I constantly have to prove myself. And I was like, yeah, you do. I was like, I don't know what else to tell you. I was like, but it's not like how you think. Like, if your brothers, if one brother's, if Dion is it's his oldest brother, he's 25 at the time of this recording. If he's a doctor and Cameron's a lawyer, I was like, that doesn't mean that you have to be. You could be a garbage man. You could work at the post office. I was like, you don't have to follow in their footsteps, because here's the thing. Everybody's going to blaze their own trail. You have to blaze yours. You look and see what they've done. You try not to make the same mistakes that they made along the way. I was like, but again, you live and you learn. And keep in mind, you're not the Huxtables. None of us are. So the thing that and it was a great conversation just the 3 of us had that night sitting at the kitchen table. And the thing that I tried to impress upon them is that, like, there's a lot that we've passed on to you. I don't necessarily know that I've passed on anything toxic. I was like, but that's not for me to call. That's for you to say whether or not it's toxic or not. I was like, as someone who is driven and my wife is driven, we're about our business and we're about pushing each other and helping each other as a family. And I don't think that's toxic, but again, that's not really for me to answer. So the thing I impressed upon them, or at least tried to impress upon them, is that what happens for you, what your parents do and what they give you is, for you to take, and then a lot of it you're supposed to take, and then some of it you have to take it, and then you have to kind of not push it to the side, but you have to make the most of what they give you, the gems that they give you, and then you take it and kind of run with it your own way. But it was a very interesting conversation. And I just told him, like, each child is different. I like, it's 3 of you guys. We have 3 sons, and our daughter's our youngest child, and she's 13. And I'm like, look, even as a parent, I have to figure out how I'm going to parent everybody with love and discipline. And in saying that, I have to also know which buttons to push. The button that I push for Dion is not the same button that I push for Cameron. The button that I push for Cameron is not the same for Skylar. One for Skylar is not the same for Brandon, and so forth and so on. And so the thing that I took from that conversation is try not to pass any toxic traits on to my children. And I told him, like, hey, you said one of the things that was toxic for me growing up was not the ability not to be able to talk and have a voice in the house. I was like, you guys see that that's not something that I passed to you, because y'all have a voice. I was like, now, you don't have the final say, but, in allowing them to grow up, Brandon's 18, they have been able to express themselves. And I'm totally okay with that to a degree. You can't talk back or you can't be disrespectful. But their experiences, I think, will lend them to the idea that mom and dad probably weren't as toxic maybe as they thought. Maybe we are. I don't know. The one thing I do know is that we're not the Huxtables. Which brings me to a song. There's a song by one of my favorite MCs, Fonte Coleman from The Foreign Exchange. He had a solo album and he had a song called Cry No More. And I'll read an excerpt to you that I want to break down real quick. In Cry No More, he says, They ask me where I've been, dog. I've been rebuilding with my whiz and children. Put my pops in the ground, then hit the repass and ate the same shit that killed him. Your habits don't deviate, just the thought you would appreciate. My mom used to say I was a whore just like you. So Ma, I ran through even more just to spite you. And Pops, my health is doing pretty good despite you. I tried so I don't die at 54 just like you. I'm one snowflake away from an avalanche. My first teachers were masters of self-sabotage. My mom walking slower these days. She got a stent. Still on them Newports. Where's your fucking common sense? And I'll stop right there. The part where he says my first teachers were masters of self-sabotage. Listen, your first teachers are your parents. And while Cliff and Claire Huxtable tried to impart wisdom and guidance into their children, we all do. But again, we're not the Huxtables. Your parents, you get so much from your parents. You spend most of us get a chance to spend most of our lives around our parents. So if you're around your parent, it's natural that you're going to be like them in a lot of ways. Because they're your first teachers, you're going to pick up from them how to walk, how to talk, habits, their actions. You know, one of the things I always say, I never forget my dad told me when I was little, and it's something I've heard all my life and I've passed it on to my kids, is when you're a parent, there's 3 things you have to give your children: love, discipline, and an example to follow. Love and discipline, pretty easy. An example to follow, that's the tough one, because kids will see what you do more so than what they hear, especially as they get older. Because, you know, here's the thing. For all of us, our parents are like superheroes. And then we all get to a point in life where we realize, like, hey, he ain't Superman. Like, he's a human. Like, he's a flawed individual. She's a flawed individual. And they make mistakes. I mean, nobody's perfect, right? And everybody can't, while a lot of us are given the opportunity to become parents, everybody's not ready to become a parent. Everybody doesn't know how to parent. So, you know, some of us have been brought here, and we're brought here to live in a world where, you know, the people who brought us here wasn't ready for us to be here, and they never got ready, and they didn't really do a good job once we got here. So your first teachers can't produce self-sabotaging ways. At least you would hope that they wouldn't, because it's not going to benefit you in the long. And I'll close out with this. From that same song, Fonte says, my sons look at me these days and think I'm certified, preparing them for a world they'll be deserted by. Internalize, black man, if you get a teaspoon of passion, that's more than double the serving size. Yeah, I live that. I mean, like, I tell my kids all the time, they'll say, well, Dad, that's not fair. My response, life ain't fair. It's not fair, especially for a young black man or a young black lady. It's not. And so, yeah, you think this world is going to owe you something. It's not going to owe you anything. You know, if you get a teaspoon of compassion, that's more than double the serving size. I mean, that's a bar right there, because the world isn't going to give you anything. Whatever you get, you're going to have to go get. And there's going to be people that are going to help you along the way. More importantly, you should help yourself. Hopefully the people that brought you into this world, the people who've catered to you, the people who've nurtured you, the people who've loved you, will help you get to those places. In closing, we're not the Huxtables. Most of us, a lot of us, come from very humble beginnings. Not a lot of us were born with silver spoons in our mouths. Miss Hawkins. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. But seriously, I think it's important that we understand that we're not the Huxtables, but we also understand that the traits and the things that we pass on to our kids, the people around us, it's important. And always remember this: people are watching, your kids are watching, your family members are watching what it is that you're doing, be it good or bad. They're watching and they're making decisions based on what you do. If you know someone's watching and you know someone cares about you, the least that you could do is be the best that you can be and be yourself. You owe that to yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday and every Sunday at midnight. If you're on social media, hit us up, 12 Kyle podcast across the board. You can contribute to the show financially on Cash App, $TWELVEKILE. Also, you can buy merch. Click the link in the description box that says merch. We have 12 Kyle podcast t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs. We got it for the low. And we have a new baby. Let me say that again. We have a new baby. It is called the Rap Soul Podcast. It is a music podcast where we talk about music and artists from the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s when it comes to rap, hip-hop, R&B, and soul. Simply put, folks, it is the best music podcast that you've never heard. So you definitely need to check it out. We drop new episodes every Monday. Listen and share it with a friend who loves music as much as you do. We're on YouTube, but on the 12 Kyle podcast, as well as the Rap Soul podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for watching. Again, that's going to do it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I'll catch you guys next time. 5,000.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.